Hi everyone, Sue here again, and Leslie and I are really excited to be trialing for the very first time the use of virtual simulation as part of the postings for this course. So we're excited to be working with you, and both of us are thrilled to give you the opportunity to go through this and also thrilled to hear your feedback. I'm not sure if any of you have worked with virtual sim, but for both of us, both Leslie and I, we have seen remarkable results, and we're excited to bring sort of a clinical focus to this course, which is quite theory-based. So you've done synthesis posting number 1, and we're going to move on and talk about what's required for synthesis posting number 2, which also happens to be the first one where we're going to use a virtual simulation as the basis for what you're going to do in your synthesis posting. So just a quick question here, what's virtual simulation? Remember we talked about that in week 2, the different kinds of learning approaches to learning, a classroom which could be online or face-to-face, clinical learning, but also simulated learning. And so here's the definition by INAXA, which is really the most current, I think, definition. Simulation, it's just an educational strategy where we create the conditions so that we can replicate or create an environment that resembles real clinical situations. And we incorporate one or more modalities to promote, improve, or validate your performance. So what you might do face-to-face simulation and be working through a situation where you need to do CPR or help with the intubation of a patient or give a medication or something like that. In a virtual sim, you may have to respond to questions. Sometimes virtual sims are in a game format, something like that. But ultimately, a virtual sim has some kind of technology, computer-mediated approach to conducting the simulation. So the simulation doesn't happen in a face-to-face format, but it's going to happen virtually. And in this era of COVID, aren't we fortunate that the science of simulation has moved so far along that we have really outstanding evidence that shows the efficacy, so the effectiveness of virtual simulation and the really stellar outcomes for learners and then ultimately for patients in the use of virtual simulation. So I'm just going to go over this to remind you of what the necessary components are of a simulation. And the reason I'm telling you that is because those are going to be incorporated into this activity. It looks like a long list of things, but ultimately you're going to learn the rhythm of the requirements for a simulation or a virtual simulation. And you'll see this in your courses as you move through the program. So you always get preparatory materials for the simulation. You may get an assigned reading, some YouTube links, a variety of different resources. So you prepare for the simulation. And I'll talk on the next slide about the specific preparation for this one. You also always do a pre-simulation self-assessment. There is a science to the learning using simulation, and it's really important that we follow that science. So as with most learning activities, before you enter the activity, it's important to say, what do I know? How would I self-assess in relation? And what we do is use the learning objectives for the simulation. All simulations, good simulations would have a learning objectives, a list of learning objectives. And we use the learning objectives and ask you just to self-assess with a sentence or two for each of the learning objectives. And there's 3 areas. Do you feel that you don't have competency, that you need competency, that you really have outstanding clinical strengths? So you're just going to pick whichever category for each of those learning objectives you would fall into, and there's a description. And then you're going to just write a sentence or so about, let's say you didn't feel you had competency, you were doing a simulation around IV medication administration, you didn't feel you had competency specifically in IV medication administration, but maybe you felt confident in the 10 rights of medication administration or something else, but it was the specific IV component that you were nervous about. So you would just do that self-assessment. So for this simulation, there's going to be a folder for you that's marked Virtual Sim 1, and you will have all of the materials listed in there. All of you will do that pre-simulation self-assessment. Honestly, it should take you 5 minutes. It's not lengthy, but I want you to reflect on it, right? So the actual writing a sentence or deciding which competency you fall into is, it requires a little bit of self-reflection. So that will be there, and there's a Dropbox. Just put it in the Dropbox. We're not graded on it, but we just need to see that you've done that because it's a necessary step. So you've done the preparation, you've looked at the preparatory materials, you've done that pre-simulation self-assessment, and then in that folder, the Sim1 folder, you're also going to see a link to a pre-brief. And a pre-brief is just a short recorded sort of summary of what's going to happen in the simulation. It prepares you for the simulation. If there's technical things you need to know, it goes over again just the focus. It's not a teaching opportunity. It tends to be fairly short and is just a preparation for the simulation. So it's important that you listen to that. It's fairly short, and you'll just have a link, and you'll see that there's an opportunity for you to listen to that as a Zoom lecture like this. Short, to the point, prepares you. And then you'll actually take part in the sim. You don't have to do it immediately after the pre-brief. At some point, you do the simulation. So this all doesn't have to happen in one sitting, although much of it could. But you following the pre-brief within the next short period of time, because you've only got a week for this, you're going to complete the simulation. And virtual simulations tend to be very short, anywhere between 20 and 30 minutes. The link for this simulation is provided at the end of the PowerPoints for this discussion here. And so you'll be able to follow that link to the simulation and work your way through the simulation. Following any simulation, we do a debrief. And I bet many of you have completed this. A debrief is where you get together and talk about what happened. How did you feel? What did you think of your performance? But also more critically, what components were really important? How did a certain activity relate to patient outcomes? Things like that. And so debriefs in face-to-face simulation typically happen immediately afterwards, and they happen face-to-face. Again, we're doing an asynchronous, so not all of you are doing the sim at the same time. Debrief, and that debrief is actually going to be a group debrief. So that means in your small groups, there'll be a series of questions in that discussion forum, just like you had some questions to work on for your synthesis posting 1. The debrief is actually the questions that will form your synthesis posting 2. So as a group, you'll answer those questions individually, and the leader will bring together those responses into a synthesis. And then finally, there's a post-simulation self-assessment. Do you remember you did the one I said at the beginning? We're just looking at the learning objectives. You're just determining your level of competency in writing a sentence or 2 for those learning objectives. The same thing's going to happen following the simulation. You want to really think about then, after this, before the simulation, I felt that maybe I was very confident in a certain aspect. Following the simulation, as I've thought about it, I am not so confident, or have learned enough to think I need to work more on something, or you may have the same assessment. But it's the same document. It's just now you're retrospectively evaluating yourself. Again, Leslie and I are not grading this. We just need to know that you've done it, because in order for this to be a valid virtual simulation, we need these components. Right, so you'll do some preparation. You'll do that pre-simulation assessment, takes 5 minutes. You'll listen to the debrief, very short and to the point. You'll take part in the simulation, and you're going to all do this on your own time, whatever is best for you. You can do it more than once if you'd like. And you're going to do a group debrief, and that group debrief will be questions that appear in your small group discussion forum that form the basis for the leader to create a post based on a summary of your responses to those questions, and that post is due to the large group discussion board by the due date. And finally, you're all going to upload that post-simulation self-assessment. Okay, so let's talk about this sim in particular. Luckily, the prep materials for this sim include the class readings. So the class readings are from last week, critical thinking, and from this week, materials on role and role competencies. So there's no extra prep materials, it's just the class prep materials. And part of that is for you to really see how these discussion postings, the synthesis postings, and the virtual sim really tie in the theory topics of the course, but bring it also a little bit closer to practice. And part of the reason we're excited about that is that many of you really were hoping you could see the relationship between what you're learning in the classroom and practice. And we're hoping we're going to see that here. You're going to do that pre-sim self-assessment. Remember I told you all the time you're going to do it very brief, should take you 5 minutes at most. And that's going to be in that folder labeled simulation number 1. That's done individually, and you put it in the Dropbox for Sim 1 pre-assessment. There's going to be a link to a short recorded pre-brief, right? And that's going to be, again, in that same folder. All the sim materials are in that same folder. Then you're going to see a link to the virtual sim, and that's actually at the end of this PowerPoint, but I'll also make a separate PowerPoint in case somebody's forgetting or other things. So a link to the actual virtual sim, Remember we talked about this? You're going to do that post-simulation self-assessment, 5 minutes. You're going to now reflect on the simulation, and you're going to complete that individually and put it in its own Dropbox, Sim1 post-assessment. And then you're going to do that small group debrief, right? That's where you go to your discussion forum. You're going to see some questions there in your discussion forum. All of you should answer all of the questions this time, not separate them out. Answer all of the questions this time. And then the leader, who will tell everyone what day those are due, so the leader has enough time to pull them all together, will create that synthesis posting. And in that synthesis posting, you don't have to have everybody's voice sound the same. So for example, some of you will have all answered questions the same way, or had a little bit of difference, just a little bit, and had some discussion, then you came together with that common idea. Sometimes there are very different ideas, and the leader can say, some members of the team felt this way, and some members of the team felt that way. So it's okay to have both a common answer that reflects everyone's voice, everyone's experience, or divergent thinking. You can honor it either way. And don't forget, you want to bring in some literature, right? Some scholarly literature into those response questions. All right. So that will be synthesis posting number 2. Synthesis postings number 1. Leslie and I are working our way through, and they are fantastic. So bravo to all of those leads. And as we work our way through, remember, the best way for you to continue to grow and develop is to read the other team posts. And that's why we've got this alternating schedule, right? A week of postings and then a week to respond to 2 others, but also to read them as much as possible. And you see how other groups are doing things. Okay, and there's the simulation link. I hope you like it. This is an interprofessional simulation, which I think has some really good learning, and I hope you enjoy it. I will also post this link separately for anyone who doesn't want to go back to this PowerPoint, but wants to instead just go to the link if you want to redo it several times. I think it's quite interesting to do the simulation. In any case, we're looking forward to hearing from you. I know sometimes things are new. It's important to just hang in if it feels new, and remember to rely on your teammates, rely on other group members, and reach out to Leslie or I if you need anything at all. But for those of you who are thinking this all feels too new, honestly, you're doing great. You are just doing great. So hang in and use your resources, but also don't forget Leslie and I are always here. So we look forward to hearing back from you as we work our way through this. Thanks so much. Have a fantastic week.